Show presents Scratch a Track,
the podcast where we debate which track to scratch off some of the most known and unknown albums of all time.
We live in an era of singles.
This is an album.
People no longer listen to an album for the work it truly is.
It kind of defines a band.
It's just not something that people relate to nowadays.
We've all gotten the dreaded.
It started out as a game.
Which track on the album would you scratch out if you had to? Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of Scratch a Track presented by The Dude and Grim Show. How you doing there, Grimmer?
I'm doing.
Yeah, you ready for this one? We got kind of an exciting album. I know it's one I've been looking forward to.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, why don't you tell everybody which one we're going to be rapping about today?
I think we're going to talk about Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's definitely it's been high on my list for I think a long time. It's one of my of their, I think, 4 albums. Now I go back.
Yeah, you can't say just 4, but
yeah, 4. But
maybe of that era,
of the 4 favorite. Yeah,
of that era. Yeah,
but then I throw in Tattoo You. But
yeah, sure.
When I think of Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Exile, and then Sticky Fingers.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean those are just, dude. To put out those 4 albums in a row is pretty insane.
Oh, I know.
They're just epic if you think
absolute
about all the
mainstays.
Material.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. And we will definitely be talking about at one point or another those albums will be covered on this channel. So no one needs to worry.
But this is the first one.
Yeah.
And I guess there's no good reason why. I mean, chronologically, it doesn't necessarily make sense, being that one could argue that Beggar's Banquet was first, but I don't know what it was. For whatever reason, this album, for me, I think stood out more. I don't know how it affected you.
Yeah, I must admit, now that I kind of think about it, and I just take those 4 albums, I love this album. It's a great album. And we're not playing scratch an album here, but of those 4 albums, this might actually be my least favorite of those 4.
Oh, really? Now that I did not know.
Yeah. It I think it might be. So, I mean, I can't really tell you exactly when I got into it or started listening to it. I mean, I think seeing the main song for me that really got me hooked was Gimme Shelter. And I think I remember my dad got me the documentary Gimme Shelter because I was really into the Stones when I was in high school.
Okay.
And I really liked that documentary. And of course that, the song, I mean, the self-titled song. And I just kind of, I knew that song, and then you can't always get what you want. I think those were the radio ones that I was always hear. But not to get too deep into the album yet, but it's weird because I feel like those 2 songs are very different than all the other ones on the album. They're kind of like the least bluesy and stuff, and it's
wait, you said Gimme Shelter and what else?
You can't always get what you want.
Yeah. You can't always get what you want. It's very gospel influenced, and with the choir. I mean, it's kind of in a different direction than I think not only most of the stuff on this album, but you could argue a lot of their stuff in general.
Yeah, well, the thing is actually, I read that You Can't Always Get What You Want. It was actually recorded in '68 before they even did Beggar's Banquet, and that didn't even make the album or make Beggar's Banquet the album. And then they actually went into the studio in early '69 after Beggar's Banquet to start recording, which would become Let It Bleed.
That agrees with what I've read. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it was released December 5th, 1969. They were a very popular band at that point, and just like the Beatles, and so anything that came out pretty much was automatically on the charts. So they didn't have any issues, making charts and making hits and selling records. They just their name alone. and it is the Let It Bleed when it came out. It's actually the album that knocked Abbey Road off from the #1 spot in the UK for only 1 week.
I did read that, but that is an interesting fact nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and yeah, so it was released in '69, and one of the things is Brian Jones, who was their basically the leader, the beginner of the band, the originator.
Yeah.
He got fired because he was into a lot of stuff.
Well,
that eventually.
That's also what I read, and it led to his demise ultimately in his own swimming pool, which that's a bad deal. Yeah. But yep, replace.
I mean, dude, yeah. To get kicked out of the Rolling Stones, man, like you got to be, you got to be. I mean, because dude, we all know Mick and Keith and everybody. Like they're not, they're not Boy Scouts, man. Like exactly. They're doing some stuff too. So Brian Jones must have had some real problems, and I guess when it, and I know you've had this in bands that you've been in, where when it starts affecting the group. And practices and shows and everything.
Sure, and I can't compare anything to the Rolling Stones, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There is a limit, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even for the Stones.
Sure, totally. Even for the Stones. Oh, man. Yeah. But yeah, you're right.
And one of the things I haven't read up on is, I guess I don't know where he sat in terms of the musical direction, because the Stones are interesting in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways to me is that I think the comparison always becomes between the Beatles and the Stones.
Sure.
Right?
Course. Yeah.
And I do feel that the Beatles did more for music as a whole. I think that in terms of rock and roll, like the Beatles progressed rock and roll to a place that no other band could have. However, in the same breath, if you're looking at taking some of the influences and maybe covering or doing an homage to some of these influences in the way that a lot of the bands wanted to, I don't think anyone did it better than the Stones, because I think they did it true to life, and they had a soul that not all the other bands or any of the other bands really had, and that was that's an interesting thing about them, I think.
Yeah, no, it's as much as people want to, compare the Beatles and the Stones, and they're very different. Their histories are very different. Their music is very different. Kind of the, after what was it? After after Rubber Soul or Revolver? Basically, when the Beatles stopped touring, I mean, they just became a studio band at that point. Like, one of the things the Stones are known for is their live shows and just rocking out. Like, I mean,
absolutely.
It's really interesting that they've been able to keep going, in really doing it. They're still doing it. I think Mick Jagger had open heart surgery sometime last year, and he was performing like a couple months later or something. I mean, it's just unbelievable, man, unbelievable. But yeah, so during this album, I don't know if I'd say the creative force, but one of the mainstays,
one of the main forces,
he gets kicked out, and I don't think it was really as dramatic as when Syd Barrett left Pink Floyd or something like that, where it's like, oh, we got to find our way, and where do we go now? Because Mick and Keith were
knew where
really
they were going,
strong presences,
sure.
They were very strong presences. So, but pretty crazy that he got fired, and then within a month of being fired, he is when he passed away. And they held that free concert in Hyde Park, and that was, I think, probably
Well, and one thing that we discussed before is, I mean, what was it? A day after the album's release was the Altamont concert, which was, I mean, not only something pivotal within their own career, but I mean, just in terms of music in general, I mean, that was like the end of the flower power hippie generation. I mean, that concert really signaled a change.
It did.
And I would argue that if we want to bring this thing full circle, I think that one could argue, I mean, look at the change in terms of the Rolling Stones. Look at the first song on this album, which is Gimme Shelter. I mean, that that song does not have that flower power hippie feel. That's something different. And that's, to me, that's like a stepping stone for where we're going.
Yeah. Well, and that was the interesting thing for me when I started actually researching and looking at this album. I was really surprised that it came out in 69, because I always think of, basically 67 to, 69, 70 is the flower power hippie summer of, the 3-year summer of love, whatever, but it seemed like, the Stones were way past that phase in 69. I mean, they had their kind of like psychedelic, era and whatnot, but Beggars
Banquet, was 2 years ago. Yeah.
I mean, Beggars Banquet was, that's even way past, the hippie stuff and everything.
I would absolutely agree.
They were just, and they moved on, and that's where this album, from touring in the U.S. and they pulled all their influences, and it's this gospel blues kind of album, man, and it's not the hippie summer of love, flower power type of music. It's not like the stuff that Dead was doing, or Jefferson Airplane or the Doors, the American bands. They went in a completely different direction.
Yeah, you have a great point, and I think it's like the songs, as I look at it, the songs that were theirs, you either have like your Gimme Shelter or your Midnight Rambler, which were somewhat darker, I would argue.
Yeah.
And then you have their blues covers, and some other originals that were a little more country, but I mean, it was all... Yeah, you're right. It wasn't in that vein. It was not in that vein, and it was something different.
Yeah, and
it was like signaling a change almost, even before the Altamont concert.
Yeah, and for those people who are listening, I would highly recommend seeing the documentary "Gimme Shelter," and it kind of
That's the one that covers Altamont, correct?
Yes,
just so I'm because
it finishes with that, but it kind of shows everything leading up to it. So,
the tour leading up to that.
Yeah. I think they kind of I don't know if it was Madison Square Garden, but they kind of were documenting that tour, and on the tour there's this basically this last minute thing, this idea, and it's that very, I hate to say it, kind of that, hippie, mentality of, well, we'll just see what happens.
We'll have a festival.
And on one hand, I think that's great. At the same time, I think, basically anything at this festival that could have gone wrong went wrong.
Did.
I mean, you had people know it's documented the Hells Angels were there as security. They were fighting and beating up the crowd.
Guy.
Yeah, they killed a guy. I think a couple people. Yeah, there was one death, 4 births, I think they said. And
Jesus, God.
I mean, 300,000 people were there. I mean, 300,000. That's crazy for a free concert. It's so I would highly recommend that.
Well, that even looking at the Altamont free concert, I mean, you had Santana, you had Jefferson Airplane, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Rolling Stones. So it was like
right.
You had the bands before them, I think you could argue were more like hippie-ish bands, so to speak. I mean, they were more in that generation. And then the Rolling Stones just came and threw like double fists up in the air and said, "Go fuck yourself," you know?
Yeah. And it definitely was more the, you know, the San Francisco scene, which, you know, Altamont is very, very, I think it's just across the bay. And so it had, you know, they had all those Bay Area bands kind of, and then you bring in the Stones, and you know, and that's not to say like, you know, the Stones music is going to start a riot or anything like that, but it's just a lot
more
of things
prone
kinda,
to,
So it was just interesting when I was doing the research that Let It Bleed officially came out the day before this concert, and at that show, I think you were looking at the set list. They actually played about half the album, half the songs they actually played. They didn't make it through all the songs.
Yeah, I'm seeing that they played Midnight Rambler, they played Live With Me, they played Gimme Shelter, and I think that's it.
Oh.
But I mean, you know, I'd say some heavy hitters from the album.
Yeah, definitely. So
I guess without further ado, getting into the album.
Yeah, let's do it. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, the first track, "Gimme Shelter," and it's probably
one of my favorites
song on the track. It's probably one of my favorite just songs of theirs in general. It's just a good song.
Man, you know, I'll be honest, I have a hard time if you're talking about this album saying that that's my favorite versus Midnight Rambler, because man, Midnight Rambler and Monkey Man. I mean, Monkey Man's
dude, the piano.
I know, in its own right. But either way, I think Gimme Shelter is interesting because I feel like it has this darkness that I don't know that you heard from the Stones prior to that point. It has a certain element of darkness. And I mean, let me look at who sang the background, because there was, so Mary Clayton apparently sang the co-lead vocals on that track.
Okay. Yeah, and it's
her vocals are amazing, but what I like is that you can hear where her vocals start to break apart in that song, and I think it's amazing that they kept that.
Yeah.
Because that like, to me, that adds this, it adds this element to the song that like, man, you just, you can't, I don't know what else you can say about it. I mean, it adds an element that like very few songs have because they kept that.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's, you know, a lot of people would be like, oh, well, we peaked or it cracked. Let's do it over. It's like, no, it fits. It really fits. It does.
Yeah. Let it go.
Yeah. And then, you know, so they start off, and that's a great track to really start an album off with.
Oh, man. No kidding.
It hits you. It does. And then we move on to Love in Vain. And that it's like all of a sudden, you know, they really slow it down.
Well, and Love in Vain's an old blues cover. I believe that's a Robert Johnson song, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, they do an interesting version of it, and you know, I think it works for them.
Yeah, it does. And
they can cover the blues. I would argue, especially of the English bands. Not that I could cite an American band who could do it any better, but I feel like they were able to cover the blues like nobody else. Nobody else of their counterparts or their cohorts could.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, Led Zeppelin did a lot of blues stuff,
but they did it differently.
It was so different. Yeah, it was so different. It was so different.
Yep, yeah. and I think they tried to stay more true to form, which is interesting to me. I mean,
yeah.
Especially having Robert Johnson's recordings and listening to that, it's just different.
Right. Well, then we move on. You know, they continue to stay in that blues, and they go to a little country honk,
which I love because it's a cover of their own song, which I think is kind of brilliant.
It is really funny.
And there's really nothing to me. I don't know what it is, but I really love the fact that you can hear that car horn in the beginning go.
Dude, I'll tell you what, man. No matter how many times I've heard that song and I'm driving, it trips me out.
I know.
If I'm in the car, I'm always like looking over, like, what's going on?
I was outside the other day during this whole quarantine period with my 5-year-old daughter riding her bike, and we were listening to this album because I knew we were going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I heard the honk, and it still tripped me out. And there were no cars on the street.
No, and it's like you've heard it a million times. You know it's coming. But
and I like, I think it's an interesting idea to like do a cover of your own song.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that's cool. But
it's funny, but they named it differently too.
Sure,
which is just kind of funny in itself. So then we move on to Live With Me, the fourth track on the album.
And I do like this track. I think it really describes in a good way like how kind of screwed up like the rock and roll lifestyle is.
Sure, yeah.
Because you know they're talking about like what or Mick, I guess, who's singing, is talking about like what it's like living with Keith Richards and some mistake. I mean, I
can only imagine.
It's like this crazy thing, but it's interesting to hear nonetheless. Like, I don't know that I would want to live with them, but but it's interesting.
And especially, you know, just one thing for me is I always, when we talk about albums, it's always about the flow for me of, you know, you got the tracks that hit you and then you slow it down and then the transitions. And, you know, I would never say that this is, I don't think never think of the Stones as like a concept album band where they're like, songs are flowing into each other. That's just not their style. But it's, you know, they hit you with Gimme Shelter. They kind of slow it down with Love.
Yeah, they have a nice rhythm.
Yeah, even Country Honk it's a little slower. It's a little kind of upbeat. You know, it's just got it moves a little bit. But then, dude, it just Live With Me just starts out nasty. It's just it's like, dude, it has this like I put it on and it's kind of like a dirty feeling. I feel like I need to take a shower.
And you got Bobby Keys on the sax. Like it's just it's a different feel than the other ones.
Yeah.
And then you go to Let It Bleed, and like I love the fact that Let It Bleed is like the title track, so to speak, for the album.
Yeah, I do too.
I also think that despite the fact that there's a lot of things they say in Let It Bleed that I don't think a lot of people could necessarily relate with, I do like it because I think for the time it makes sense. Like, you know, like he says something to the effect of, you can lean on me if you need a little coke and sympathy. Like
sympathy. Yeah.
It's just,
it's like, what are friends for?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. It's an interesting song. A lot of the words and lyrics and things. It's if you actually sit down and listen to the words, or read the words, it's pretty interesting for sure.
Well, absolutely, and I like the fact that it's kind of like a country song. I mean, it really kind of is, and I think they do a great, and that's again like where the Stones did things that the other bands of the time couldn't do. Like they could do a song like that, and I don't know who else could have pulled it off.
Right? Yeah. That's the thing, and that's one of the things about the Stones is that they get away with it.
Yeah, but it's not even that they get away with it. They do a fucking great job.
Yeah. There's really no. They have no shame. Like,
no,
they don't. They don't care, and that's good for them. We need bands like that. But
and again, well, not again, but a great song to end the side with. Mm-hmm. Because then, you end the side with that and you start out with Midnight Rambler. And, dude, I guess I haven't done enough research to know if Midnight Rambler was a cover or was based off some old blues lyrics. But it's hard to think of a better Stones song because it is just so good, and it builds. It does. And when he has that lyric at the end that said, "I'll stab my knife right down your throat," like, and I know it hurts. I mean, dude. Oh,
yeah.
That is.
It's pretty intense. It is pretty intense for sure. And the song does have, I would say the Stones are known for like their transitions within songs a lot. I feel like a lot of times they get a groove and they'll kind of go with it.
Go with it, yeah.
But this song, and especially when they perform it live, that they actually do. It's a longer song. I want to say it's like 6.
No, I agree, and it's. I mean, the album track is almost 7 minutes. And
right.
For them, I mean, I feel like that's a quite a long ordeal. But man, it's so good, and it just hits.
Yeah.
I mean, to go back to that lyric. I mean, when he says that lyric, you're just like, God damn right it hurts. Like,
definitely. So we move on from Midnight Rambler, and then we go into Keith Richards gets his little moment here.
Yeah.
With You Got the Silver, and it's just a short kind of, I don't know, fun little song. I mean,
but it's a blues song, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he didn't. I'm trying to think like how many Keith songs there are. I mean, all the writing credits are always Jagger Richards, but
sure, but
where he really sings on
it, not a whole lot. And I think that for this song, I think his voice fits, and I think it's again, it's a good blues song, and it's cool because it kind of like we talked about earlier, it kind of slows down the momentum of the album. And prepares you for what's next, which is Monkey Man, which, I mean,
dude,
good God. I mean, that's...
Dude, the opening piano is one of the sexiest sounds I think I've ever heard in music.
I know.
There's just something about it. I'm just like, wow, that it just has such a good feel to it. And then the song just kind of explodes. It almost, in a weird way, there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, the opening piano sound, it sounds so good. It's so beautiful that it almost doesn't fit with the rest of the song
I know.
In a weird way.
It really doesn't. And I think I knew about this song before I even knew about the rest of the album. And it was that song where you were like, God, damn it, that's a good song. It's just... It's a simple riff, but it just doesn't let up, and it's so good. It's just so good.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, God, you know, I know I was saying "Give Me Shelter" is my favorite song in the album. I think, but then you know, you start going through you start going through the list and really start thinking about it and looking at some of them, and it's like,
I know
I'd have a hard time passing that one off. I really would.
Yep.
And then we move on to "You Can't Always Get What You Want," which is
a
probably
classic.
the other.
I mean,
that's
to me, that's like the Stones' "Let It Be." That's how I view it. I mean, not to compare them to the Beatles, but I mean, shit, who hasn't at this point? And it's hard not to, but like, a great song. I mean, the incorporation of a choir.
Cool. So cool.
And the lyrics are interesting. I mean, if you really listen to them, they're
it tells the story.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and which is something that they don't do. I'd have to look a little more at.
No, I completely agree with you. Their lyrics are not telling us. Not like that.
No. A lot of times it's just phrases and words and things just kind of thrown in and put together. Like there's that one song on Exile on Main Street where, you know, Mick's like, I just cut up all these short little phrases and threw them like in a hat and put them on a table and just kind of organized them on his table. And that's the order that he put, you know, the words for the song in, you know? And that's so cool. But with "You Can't Always Get What You Want," it is telling a story. And it
is.
And the song builds slowly, you know.
And it's classic. I mean, the choir. I mean, it's full. It's beautiful. It's you know. Now, I don't think they have anything else like that.
All right. Now, I heard a version of it, and I don't know if it's on the you know, because you have, I think, their singles or their greatest hits.
Yeah, the singles collection.
And is it on that? Because I've heard a version of it.
It is.
And I believe on that, I might be wrong, but I believe it actually just starts with the acoustic guitar. In the beginning, they don't have the choir. I've heard a version where it just starts with the acoustic guitar and there's no opening choir.
Yes, I believe that is the case, and I could find that file. And honestly, I like that version better
without the choir.
No, because the choir is in that version, but the choir doesn't come in right away. It starts out with the acoustic guitar, and then it builds into the choir, which I think is.
Yeah,
I should thought that was a regular version, but I think we need to listen back to make sure.
Yeah, I should say the choir intro it doesn't have.
True. And I like it without the choir intro because I think it like gives it this sense of like starting out from something real simple and building.
Yeah. It is,
and if you don't have the Rolling Stones singles collection, you know, throughout the year, that is worth getting because
some good songs on there.
There's a lot of great songs on there.
Yeah. I never had that. I always had the High Tide and Green Grass album, and then the Through the Past Darkly, which was kind of their greatest hits, sort of for that time, but.
Okay, so we come to the part of the show where it's time to play the game. Away, what's your track?
Okay, so well, let me talk a little bit about the album, and you know, we discussed a lot of the songs of the album are very bluesy, very very bluesy and stuff. But to me, I love "Give Me Shelter" and I love "You Can't Always Get What You Want." I feel like those songs, though, I think, like I said earlier, almost kind of don't fit sort of with the songs that all fall in between. And I actually feel like "You Can't Always Get What You Want" almost really kind of doesn't fit with the album and the mood and the feel. Now that's not my track, but I'm just saying that I don't if that song wasn't on there, and they put some other blues song or something in there, then I'd be like, oh, okay, that's whatever. That's cool. I kind of feel like it just doesn't fit. So
what's your track?
So I think the song for me is probably actually Country Honk.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And I think part of it is I love the idea. I love the concept. I think I can't disagree with you of a cover of your own song, like
it's cool,
pretty badass. It's fun. But I actually really like the original track a lot.
I do too.
So for me, there's a part of me that's like, the idea is fun. It's cool. Does it need to be on there? I don't know. If the song wasn't on there, I still think the album is still phenomenal.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think for me, it would probably have to be Country Honk.
Okay,
probably.
Well, for me, it's Love in Vain.
Okay. Yeah.
To me, that's well, not even to me. In reality, that's a cover of a Robert Johnson blues standard nowadays, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just they did it well. I mean, I have no qualms in terms of how they did it, but it's just like I could skip over it, and to me the album would remain the same and it would be just as amazing. And I wouldn't want to scratch any of the other ones because, like, they wrote them.
Right. Sure.
That
definitely makes sense. Makes sense to me. I like, I like that song. I think it's good. I like that it's right after Gimme Shelter, how they kind of, it punches you.
Oh, yeah. No.
It gives you a second to breathe. Gives you a second to breathe a little bit, So, yeah, I can't disagree with that. It's hard when you're picking these songs off, these pretty iconic albums of.
I hear you.
Your least favorite. So. Well, I think that about wraps up Let It Bleed. You think so? We think we're
yes,
good?
Sir.
We got our tracks. I think we covered everything pretty well. Awesome. So, well, we've been moving along on some of these albums. We got plenty of other cool albums to come. Some of them are going to be classic albums, classic rock. We're going to be also moving into other areas. We know we've done OK Computer. We're going to be doing some grunge rock, but we'll also get into other genres and things like I'm sure Bitches Brew will make the cut one of these days. We'll get into some jazz. So for everyone listening, we appreciate all your support. Continue to listen. Continue to subscribe and tell your friends about it. So until next time, the Dude and Grim. We're out.
Signing off.
Scratch a Track is produced by the Dude and Grim. Additional music provided by More. That's ... MORE and the Tims. TIMNZ. Copyright 2020. The Dude and Grim Show.